Okay, good morning. We'll call the meeting to order. Your House Revenue Committee. Bonnie, are you going to call the roll?
Right.
Can
Yes,
you
sir.
please call the roll? Thank you.
Representative Baker, Gray, Hallinan,
Here.
Henderson,
Here.
Jennings, Roscoe, Sweeney, Yin. Mr. Chairman. And Representative Gray's here. We have
Here.
9 present, sir.
Very good. Well, thank you and welcome folks here to this morning's Revenue Committee. Appreciate you braving the cold weather, being here. And so we have 2 bills this morning. The first is House Bill 105, severance tax reduction on coal, and its prime sponsor is right here sitting beside me, Representative Hallinan.
Get on there.
Whatever you would like. If you want to present your bill from here, you're
I'll
more
go
than
down
welcome. Okay, very good. Okay, good morning. Welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for having me here today. And thank you to the committee also. I have an interesting bill. It's fairly short. It's fairly simple. It's a 0.5% reduction in the severance tax on coal. And I know that you all are aware that coal pays into the severance tax fund. It also pays into the production and property sales tax, use tax, and state rents and royalties. And they're a very significant payer into the state funds. The amount that they pay in severance tax is $141 million. Ad valorem tax, which goes to the schools mainly, $124 million. Ad valorem property tax, $13,832,000, and sales tax, $12 million. So they pay a total of $292 million in state tax annually. That was in 2021, those figures. Okay, the current severance tax on surface coal is 7%, and that compares to 6.5% that is paid on oil and gas. So that's a differential that amounts to about $250 million in the last 10 years. 10 years, $250 million more tax than they would pay if they were oil and gas. So this would only amount to 0.5%. So that's a 1% difference. And that 0.5% would be half of that if we were to go forward for the next decade. So we see that a reduction in the severance tax is vital to keeping the industry viable and competitive. Frankly, the current tax burden on the industry is too high and not sustainable. The industry has faced sustained federal pressure, specifically the $500 billion in climate provisions in the current Build It Back Better bill has the following items in it. They have harmful language to the state of Wyoming and its coal industry, which mines the majority of their coal on federal lands. The provision includes a $2 federal per ton severance tax on coal. It also cuts lease times in half from 20 to 10 years to discourage coal development. A possible increase in the federal royalty tax on surface coal of up to 50% is also expected. Any of these provisions could cause serious harm to Wyoming's coal industry. To produce the mineral, to generate revenue for the state, and I would emphasize the fact that it's revenue for the state, $250 million annually, or $290 million annually, and to continue and maintain the good jobs that they provide, mainly around the state, but primarily in Campbell County. We have that, the major source of our employment in our county. And a severance tax reduction will help coal companies to reinvest in their infrastructure, purchase needed equipment and supplies, implement reclamation management, and maintain a full workforce. It should be noted that operation costs have risen across the board under the current inflation. So for all these reasons, I think they have the need for this reduction in coal severance tax. And I think that for the state of Wyoming, it's vital that we maintain our coal industry. They are the goose that laid the golden egg for the state of Wyoming. And for that reason, I urge your support of this measure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Representative Hallinan. Members of the committee, any questions for Representative Hallinan? Okay, Representative Yin.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Representative Hallinan. So do you think that this would, I mean, I guess I'm trying to understand what the policy objective is, other than just granting $10 million per year to the coal industry. Does it have an effect for Wyoming? What would that effect be? Is it that coal prices would be cheaper, or that we would mine more coal? I'm trying to understand what the end result would be, other than just giving $10 million.
Representative Hallinan.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Representative Yin. The 3% or the $10 million cut in their tax would be 3% of the amount of tax that they pay per year. And I can't believe that they wouldn't use that money to, like I said in the presentation, that they would use that money for improvement in their industrial supplies, to produce more coal. If right now they're having the opportunity to produce more coal. And I'd say that they need to make all the money they can right now on coal, produce all they possibly can, because of the shortage of coal nationwide or worldwide now. So they're making more money on their coal right now, but that's a temporary proposition. But this would give them extra money that they could use to mine the coal, to take care of those other items, providing for their work that they need to do to replace, to fill in the scars that they make on the ground when they do mine coal. And I think that that would be helpful in all those ways. It's only $10 million. And there are a lot of coal companies in the state, but $1 million here, $1 million there would add up quite a bit when you add up all the mines around the state and the amount of coal that they can produce. So with that in mind, I think it would make a difference.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Members, Representative Roscoe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Hallinan, I believe we reduced the burden on the coal industry last time, or in the last couple of years. And the reason I'm asking you that is that it sort of affects how I'm viewing this as, and just this morning, looking at the economy, the price of coal is going up, and the price of natural gas is going up, which is a competitor, right? And so it should enhance the economics of the coal industry, I would think. And so I know, and I am coming to a question. How does Wyoming benefit? I mean, I- the economy, the economics that I've just heard actually are just the opposite of what I think are happening. I think actually coal is doing well, and I don't think the severance tax is going to make any difference at all in the price of coal or the amount we're going to. It's just the free market that's determining how much coal we're going to be mining, and the price is not really determined by the severance tax. So I think I'm just looking at it from Wyoming's point of view. Do you think that this is going to reduce the price of coal if we were to use this? That's my question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay,
Thank you.
Representative Hallinan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Representative Roscoe. I think that Wyoming will benefit from the increased amount of coal that gets produced and from the further economies of scale that are going to result from that. We do price the severance tax on the amount of coal that they get and what price they pay for it. The ad valorem tax is also going to go up if we produce more coal at a higher price. So I think that coal is a competitor of gas, and right now gas is up and coal is up. And I think that we may see an increase in profit over the next few years in coal. And that will help to tide them over with these long-term issues that I brought up. The effect of the feds cracking down on coal, the amount of money that they're raising in terms of the royalty payments that they pay, and putting a $2 or a 2% increase in their tax, the severance tax they pay to the feds. So I think that this would help provide for the health of the industry. And I estimated that, I said, they paid $292 million in total taxes to the state of Wyoming in 2021. And I think that we want to keep a business like that operating. And that's part of the reason for reducing this severance tax, to keep them in healthy operation.
Okay.
And for that reason, I think it's a good idea to reduce our tax on them in the long-term interest of the coal industry. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Sorry. I thought you were finished. I already moved to public comment here. Are there any other questions? Representative Jennings has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Hallinan, being a co-sponsor and obviously being in favor of this, is there some constitutional or at least some equity issues with this? I mean, you mentioned it at the beginning, but could you go into that a little bit? It seems like there's a problem there where they're being charged more in the same class, the same type of unit that they're being classified in, and yet they're being charged more than gas and oil and stuff like that. Could you go into that just a little bit more?
Well, thank you,
Go ahead,
Mr. Chairman.
Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Jennings, I don't really have the expertise in the Constitution that you probably do. And I don't really know that that would be covered, the differential in price they charge these two competitors. I do say that fair is fair and that their rate of severance tax ought to be equal. Now, this doesn't equalize it. It simply makes it a little less one-sided. So I don't really have an answer to that about the Constitution.
Okay, just real quick, thinking back to history when Governor Hathaway went and really recruited, probably took the coal industry from Montana, what was the original severance tax back in the day? It seemed like it was like 12%.
I think it was.
And had a step down, to really build that infrastructure in Campbell County. And it's been at this current 7 now for a long, long time. I'm sure there's folks here who'll know that, but okay, appreciate your presentation. And I think then if there's no other questions, we're going to move to public comment. Are there folks here, executive branch, that want to comment on this bill? Anybody, any other elected officials want to see a county commissioner from Campbell County? I think if we were redoing license plates, you guys would have number one on your license plate.
Yeah, probably.
That's the old Salt Creek oil field, 1937.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you very much. Rusty Bell, Campbell County Commissioner, and I'm here representing myself and the rest of the Campbell County Commission in support of this bill. And I don't know that I can answer the questions that were asked of Representative Hallinan, but I can certainly try. We stand in support of this bill because some of the things in Campbell County's infrastructure actually do need a little bit of work. You know, the mines are still mining, and they're doing things that they've done for the past 30 or 40 years, and the market's tough and margins are a little tighter. So moving roads and those kind of things are expensive, and they still are infrastructure, and it is important for them to continue mining already leased coal. So I don't think, Mr. Chairman, that this bill requires the coal companies to spend that money that they're saving on this any certain way. I think it would certainly benefit Wyoming and Campbell County and all of us if they're putting those dollars back into that infrastructure or back into things that maybe will increase the use of coal in other ways than thermal. So, we certainly support this. I think it does bring it in that severance tax I think in a little bit more into line with what oil and gas is. But other than that, we really just want to support our industry, and any way we can do that, we're going to be here to try to help them. So with that, I would stand for any questions.
Okay, members. Representative Sweeney has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, so one of my thoughts is, and you kind of touched on it, if we could amend this bill a little bit to say, my understanding is bonding is currently still an issue with the companies. And do you think there's a way that we can help with that issue with this bill if it was amended properly, that the money went towards bonding or infrastructure, as you mentioned also, and be a little more specific? Do you have any thoughts on that? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Sweeney, I guess I have a lot of thoughts on that. I think one of the big helps or one of the big things that we could do as a state is with bonding. Right now, I think that the companies, and there's some of those folks in here that are going to know a lot more about this than I do, but my understanding is that they bond their reclamation. Bonding is based on a third party company coming in and doing that from scratch. Those companies actually are reclaiming constantly. They do it much better and at a much more affordable price. If we could find a way to do that, I don't know if this is the bill, Representative Sweeney, I really don't. But certainly freeing up some of those dollars makes it a little bit easier on their bottom line on that bonding. I think there's some other ways especially in the infrastructure as we move forward through, no matter what the markets do at some point, whether it's 2 years or 50 years, some of those infrastructure sites are going to become available. Taking those out of the reclamation bond earlier for those companies and letting them market those that would benefit Wyoming for some other use. I think that makes a lot of sense. If we're going to actually turn all those infrastructure sites into sagebrush, we should really have a second thought on that. That's a scary thought to take hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of infrastructure and turn it back into sagebrush. So I think there's some things to look at. I'm not sure that this is the bill for that. I think this bill really does just give those that coal industry a helping hand up, and hopefully they use it in those infrastructure things and whatever those needs are. You know, they might they've been running lean the last few years. Haven't bought as much equipment as they have in the past. I mean, this maybe frees up some of that. Then we make money on sales tax. So I mean, I think there's probably some give and take on that. If they reinvest into the mining that they're doing, I think this is a really, really good bill. I think it's a good bill anyway. So I don't know if that totally answers the question, but.
Okay, any other questions for the commissioner? How many years you been a commissioner?
This is my, Mr. Chairman, this is my 8th.
Wow, all right. Appreciate your service.
Thank you.
Okay.
It's not been all butterflies and roses and all that
Oh,
kind of
yeah.
stuff. So
Been tough times in the coal patch in Wyoming. Is I mean, as coal's gone, we've gone. It's been
Yeah.
tough, but keep working.
thank you. Mr.
Okay,
Mr.
thanks for
Mr.
being here.
Chairman.
Okay.
Commissioner Bell is also co-chairman of the Wildlife Task Force.
Yeah,
So which is not reimbursed at all. So it's all on his own dime.
Yeah.
So appreciate it. Truly appreciate his service.
for sure. Appreciate you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Sweeney, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, any other members from the executive branch or anyone? Okay, we're going to go to folks in favor of this bill. So if you're in favor of this bill, if you want to come up, take a seat, we've got 3, we can queue you up and we can get started here. So go ahead and introduce yourself, who you represent, and welcome to the committee.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Travis Deta. I'm the Executive Director of the Wyoming Mining Association. It's always a privilege to address this committee on a fine Wyoming day where we're below zero and we're burning a lot of coal across the country today. So, thanks to our operators for keeping the lights on. This is a good bill, and this is something that has come before this committee a number of times before. It's the right time. And we appreciate Representative Hallinan bringing this bill again. And he's always been a firm supporter of the industry and a firm supporter of this concept. And what it really is, it's really about competitiveness. The severance tax currently for surface coal is at 7%, natural gas at 6%. To answer one of the other questions, the extraction sectors are taxed differently on severance tax. Coal is at 7, oil and gas at 6 right now. I believe Trona is at 4. Uranium is on the sliding scale based on the price of the mineral. As of today, uranium, I believe, is at about $42. So I think they're at about a 2% rate right now. And that will sunset in a couple of years. But it really is about an issue of competitiveness. And, there are other things that not only competitiveness, but as was mentioned in the previous discussion, other things for investment in the coal industry. Representative Sweeney had some numbers and they were a little bit more updated than mine. But I'd just like to kind of, if the committee would indulge me, just a few minutes to talk about the full scope of the tax burden on the coal industry. And I'm using my 2020 numbers because I don't have my 2021 gathered yet. On our 2020 production of 218.5 million tons, our total tax burden that the industry paid, and this is not only the money that goes to the state, but also to the federal government, was upwards of $833.5 million. We paid state severance tax that year in 2020, 174 million. Our ad valorem on production, 154 million. Our ad valorem on property, 13.5 million. Sales and use tax, 17 million. State rents and royalties, 33 million. Federal mineral royalties, a total, which goes, the 48 to 50 split to the federal government, 264 million. Our federal mineral bonus payments, which we're still getting a little bit trickling in, 921,000. We also pay AML fees, which were 31.4 million in 2020. And then one of the fees that we pay that's a borderline crippling sometimes is the black lung fee. We paid $140 million in black lung fees. That's money that goes pretty much out of the state of Wyoming to fund the federal black lung trust. And we don't have a black lung issue in Wyoming. So we're paying a lion's share to that fund that we don't really even see a benefit from. So our total in 2020 $833.5 million. What came to Wyoming was about $550.9 million. And that's down over 50% from where we used to be when we were mining 390 million tons of coal a year. The industry and the environment has changed. It has changed. And what we see with this bill is an opportunity to help right-size that tax burden. We're still going to be the most heavily taxed industry in the state. We're probably the most heavily taxed industry in the country when you consider all the taxes, royalties, and fees that the industry pays. So this is simply an effort to move towards right-sizing that tax burden. We get along with our friends in the oil and gas industry very well. We're allies on a lot of things. We're both under heavy pressure from the federal government, being fossil fuels, but we are competitors. And I think that is probably the most fundamental benefit of reducing the severance tax. 5%, we'd hope we'd get parity, go a full 1% and give us full parity because we are competitors. Again, the fundamental benefit is to make coal competitive with other fuel sources and other generation options, especially when gas prices are low, and they're good right now. And the figure we use is $2.65. At $2.65 gas, our higher BTU coal is competitive. When we get over $3, our lower BTU coal is competitive. Prices now about I think it was $4.59, what I looked at this morning. So we're competitive. And I do want to talk a little bit about the spot price here in a second. But when those gas prices are low, an incremental 50% or 50 cents, that can make the difference between when a coal plant dispatches and when it does not. So it is a matter of competition. The spot price today on coal, it is $23.90. That's a Friday. So it's been up as high as I think $35 was as high as it got. That is a blip. And frankly, with the environment that we're in right now, and it's a good, and there are a lot of factors that are involved in where we are today, coming out of COVID. I think the ERCOT situation in Texas last winter spooked a lot of utilities, so they wanted to have their coal on hand to burn during a cold winter. There are a lot of factors that go into that increased demand in the latter half of 2021 rather. It was very hard to meet that demand, and it still is. Number one, we have to staff up. We have to get the miners to mine the coal. We're having issues with trains because the railroads are in the same position of getting the coal out. They need people to move those trains. That situation is easing a little bit, but that $30 spot price, and this is that was a supply and demand issue. Our coal pretty much out of the Powder River Basin is sold out for 2022. They're selling into 2023. Those are more longer term contracts. And those, while we can't talk about what the price is on those are confidential. But those contracts are probably down in the $12 to $14 range. We're not selling a lot of coal in the spot market for $29. We're just not. It's a blip. And you can see from the 35 to we're already down, $23.90. It's already coming down. It's already leveling out. And those coal prices on the spot market are going to get back to where they were eventually. But it's a good year because of the demand. And this, I think, is what helps make it the right time to do this, because of a lot of the pressure that the industry is facing long term. We're having a good couple of years right now, but the macro trend right now remains the same. We're not building new coal-fired power plants. We're retiring coal plants, and we're some of them early. And the federal pressure, which is designed, make no mistake about it, which is designed from the federal government to drive up the cost of the mineral so that it's not economical to produce, with the intent to make fossil fuels more expensive and force a shift to less reliable sources. So that's all out there. The reduction in the severance tax, it'll allow our companies to reinvest in their infrastructure. It'll allow them to purchase their needed equipment and supplies, which are getting more expensive under today's inflationary pressure. They're going to implement reclamation management. You have one operator up there that's turning one of their smaller mines to reclamation, and that costs money. And they're investing in doing that. And it's needed to maintain a full workforce, as we've seen, when trying to hire employees out and in the general employment environment, where we're trying to get people back to work. You had one operator up there trying to hire miners in the last quarter. They were offering a $5,000 incentive to hire. This will help them to do that, to maintain their workforce. You mentioned bonding earlier. Bonding obligations are going up, and every company is fully bonded. Make no mistake about it. We are all fully bonded. But the cost of bonding is going up. Diesel prices are through the roof right now. A company, when they recalculate their bond every year, is having to calculate those higher diesel prices in their bond. They've got to figure out a way to cover that. And having cash on hand would help them to do that. But it fundamentally, it allows companies to have more capital in their coffers. Number one, to take advantage of our current, couple 18 months going out, but to prepare for the long term. And I will say this, because this is important. The folks with the levers of power in Washington, D.C. have made no bones about it, that they want to keep the coal in the ground. That's just it. And they're going to do it one way or the other. We mentioned, Representative Hallinan mentioned the Build Back Better plan in his presentation. We think we've got to check on that legislative mischief in Washington, D.C., but it's a very tenuous one. It's one senator. Something goes astray, and we have Build Back Better again. And some of the provisions in there are odious. $2 per ton federal severance tax. Based on 2020 production, that would be an extra $437 million that a company would have to come up with. Increase in acreage rental rates from $2 to $100. That's an increase of 98%. And then, of course, we have great concern about the current review of the BLM federal coal leasing program, which we fully expect to have a recommended royalty increase of up to 50%. And I did the back of the napkin math, and I'm not a mathematician, but based on 2020 tonnage and the average price of coal, which was roughly about $12.50 in 2020, that's another $88 million that a company has to come up with that the industry has to come up with in royalties. So that's the other side of a reduction in the severance tax, is it allows for some mitigation, if you will, that if this stuff comes to pass, and we're hopeful that it doesn't, but if it does, it gives the company a little bit of capital to help mitigate that. And ultimately, the continued pressure from the federal government, it will make it harder to produce the mineral by making it non-economical to mine. It will make us harder to generate revenue for the state. And I mean, if the coal is kept in the ground, nothing from nothing is nothing. If we can't mine the coal, nothing from nothing is nothing. A reduction in the severance tax, something from something is something. And going forward, for the next 10 decades, we're not in the early 2000s anymore. We're not going to be generating as much revenue, but we want to keep generating revenue. And this is a way to keep our companies relatively healthy. Like I say, a half a percent is great. 1% in parity with gas would be better. And so that's general where we're coming. We have a lot of concern just on the international front with this whole this ESG movement, environmental, social, governmental issues, and that's affecting the capital markets and our access to banks, our access to sureties. That's going to be a factor. So anything that I think we can do to keep the to help our companies save a little capital, prepare for the coming decade, and do those things so that we can keep producing and keep those good paying jobs in Wyoming and Campbell County and Converse County across the state, whether it's the I-80 corridor in Rock Springs or in Kemmerer, it's going to help. It is needed and it will help. And so with that, we fully support the bill. We appreciate the bill sponsor and co-sponsors, and we would urge you to move forward on this and give us a little relief.
Okay, any questions? Okay, I think they're all down here. Okay, gonna start with Representative Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So currently the spot market's about 2 to 2.5 times the contract price is what you're saying. I think I've heard. Could you historically tell me how is that related in the past? How is the spot market related to the contract price? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Baker, I will tell you, $30 spot price for 8,800 BTU coal out of the Powder River Basin is an anomaly that I have not seen in my time, in my 10 years with the Wyoming Mining Association. I cannot remember a time when it was that high. It is an anomaly.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Mr. Detail. So, I think focusing on the spot price is not useful for our discussions. So I'm looking at, I just quickly Googled on the EIA, the average costs by fossil fuel. And so for subbituminous coal, and very bad at pronunciation occasionally, the average cost per BTU has always been at least $1 under the average cost per BTU for natural gas. And I looked at the stock price for Arch coal. I looked at the stock price for Peabody. Arch is at a 5-year high this year. So I guess, again, the question is, if we are competitive on the coal price, Arch is doing great, Peabody is doing better. Why would we do this tax break now? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Detail.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Yin, 5 years. They're doing the best they have in 5 years because of the uptick in demand over the last quarter. I mean, that really is it. We're going to have a couple good years, but the overarching pressure on the industry does not change. The overarching factors of not building any coal-fired power plants, the pressure to close new ones, that's not going to change. Unless, you know what, we're investing a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of money in carbon capture technology. If we're able to bring that online, then maybe it changes. Maybe we start building new plants. The point of doing this right now is because the industry has changed, the industry is overtaxed, and in order to keep the industry relatively strong, I think the need for the companies to save a little capital, to plan for the future, and to do that sort of thing that they need to do to remain competitive, I think it's necessary.
Okay, I just want to gauge the room here. How many folks here plan to testify on this bill? Two more. Okay, I just want to make sure our timing is right. So, okay, Representative Yin.
Mr. Chairman, so just one more question. To follow up on that, you're basically saying the consumers of coal is facing market pressure to reduce the consumption of coal, essentially. So even if we give this $10 million cut, that market pressure isn't going to change, right? So I think if we want to increase the amount of coal that we want to get out of Wyoming, it would be figuring out ways that you could increase the consumption of coal. And so maybe it is $10 million in CCUS. I don't know how the $10 million here is really going to cut that.
Okay, I think Representative, did you have a question? Representative Sweeney, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Ms. D. My question centers around bonding. And do you see a path forward where we could improve this bill by talking about the bonding, which I think is a critical component for our mines? Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr.
Chairman, Representative Sweeney, I think the bonding conversation can happen. I don't think this is the bill for that. When I talked to my operators about that, if you got the cut, dedicate it to your bonding reclamation, it was unanimous that this is probably not the place to do it. They would rather have the capital to make the decisions that are best for their operation. And, when we come to bonding, we're looking for other avenues to give companies options for bonding in our assigned trust concept that we're moving through. That's going to give a company some options right there. And frankly, this bill and a reduction in the severance tax to free up capital, you may see companies taking that savings and investing in that assigned trust. That's a company decision. But to answer your question directly, I do not think that this is the appropriate bill to do bonding in.
Okay,
I
very
think
good.
we can continue that conversation.
Any further questions? Okay, thank you for your testimony.
Mr.
Appreciate it.
Chairman, members of the committee, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, any others in favor of the bill?
Mr. Chairman, David Bush with Black Hills Energy, also representing Wyodak Resources. Wyodak is our mine mouth operation up in Campbell County, serves our electric generation facilities. We are in support of the bill, as Travis pointed out eloquently, in all those different reasons. So I'll keep it short and sweet in the interest of time.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Bush? Go ahead, Representative Roscoe has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bush, this is a question I've always wondered about, and looking at the parity between taxing natural gas and coal. Is that tax, I think, severance tax, based on BTUs at all?
Go ahead, Mr. Bush.
I might have to phone a friend on that one, sir. I
Okay.
don't know for sure.
I think there's a good reason for the difference in that tax. That's why I brought it up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, I think Representative Sweeney has a question, and then Representative Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Bush, kind of the same question representing your company versus an association. Do you think an amendment could make this more palatable on the bonding issue? Or isn't that a problem for your company?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Sweeney, I don't think the bonding side of it is as much of a problem for us. We're fairly small, and the mine manager and my conversations with him hasn't mentioned that as something that's been as much of a burden as it I think it has been for some of the larger ones. So.
Okay, Representative Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just briefly, I do think there's some historical relevance in discussing the spot price and how it's historically related to the contract price. So now if the spot price is about $30 and the contract price is between $12 and $14, then it would be between 2 and 2.5 times the regular contract price would be the spot price. So historically, how are those numbers, how have they related in the past? Has it usually been 1.5 times? Has the spot market usually been 1.5 times the contract price? I mean, we understand it's a little bit high now. How is it related in the past?
Mr. Bush.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Baker, I don't know that I can answer that question. Because our operation is mine mouth, we don't, when we mine it, we put it on a conveyor, we run it underneath. It's not, we're not selling our coal on the market, and I don't know that our folks have that much play in that market. I would have to defer to Travis or somebody else on kind of the historical as far as the basin wide pricing on that. So.
Okay. Okay, any other questions, Mr. Bush? Okay, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Appreciate your testimony. Any other folks in support of the bill would like to testify? Okay, we're going to move to those who are opposed to the bill. Please come forward.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Shannon Anderson on behalf of Powder River Basin Resource Council. I appreciate your attention to this issue. I've been lobbying you for 15 years. Well, you, Mr. Chairman, you've been around the whole 15 years. And over that time, there's probably been a dozen bills like this that you have all killed. And the reason for that really is very simple. The conversation you've been having this morning exemplifies this. Coal production has declined. This is definitely a fact. But the severance tax rate has not declined, right? It's been the same over this entire period of time. The severance tax rate does not dictate how much coal comes out of the ground, how many jobs are employed in the mining industry. Really, the factors are things like how many coal-fired power plants run coal from the Powder River Basin? Are we building new coal-fired power plants? What state renewable energy portfolios say? What global market prices of natural gas say? Those are the factors that determine whether production goes up, whether employment goes up, whether production goes down, whether employment goes down. The severance tax rate isn't the factor. And so we would just urge you from a policy perspective and thinking about responsible development of our mineral resources within the state, to hold true to the standard that you've set over these many years, that the operators of the Powder River Basin and across the state pay a fair return to the development of these resources. It's an important source of funding. It goes to the general fund. It funds agencies across the state, and very valuable money for the state of Wyoming. I would just speak to a couple of points that were brought up in your discussion, Mr. Chairman. One is the comparison to oil and gas. And I would just, caution you from going down that road. It's not an apples to apples comparison. The price differentials are based on energy content, different end users, different global market pressures, it's pipeline capacity, various different factors. And so it's not an apples to apples comparison when you look at this tax rate of coal versus oil and gas. I'd also caution you to stay away from thinking about the specter of the federal government and the Build Back Better Act. I would, note, of course, that the chairman of the Senate Energy Committee in Congress is a friend to the coal industry. He comes from the second largest coal producing state in the country. His ranking member is our senior senator. Those coal provisions have been out of the bill for months. They're not going back in. Even if the bill moves forward, those coal provisions are out of the bill. So I just think it's unfair to blame the specter of the federal government for what your policy decisions are here in this room today. I'd caution you and keep you focused, I think, on the decision for the Wyoming people, and what this bill does for the budget and our revenue sources. To Representative Sweeney's question about the bonding, I think is an interesting one, and I'd be interested in exploring a little bit more with you. Maybe there would be a way to divert some severance tax money into the assigned trust concept that you just passed through the House. I agree with previous speakers. I don't think this is the bill to do that, but I think there would be maybe a way to do that would, relieve the bonding burden on the industry and make sure that we have additional money for reclamation. So there could be a solution. I just don't think this is the bill, but I appreciate the question because I think it's a good one. But yeah, with that, I would urge you to vote no, like you have many times before, and hold true to our revenue portfolio in the state. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions? I think Vice Chair Henderson has a
Sure.
question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you so much for coming forward. It's always nice to see you and learn the perspective of this good council. As I'm listening to you, I'm wondering from a policy perspective, and given the timeliness of this proposal, what incentives do you see for us within our control in Wyoming to incentivize the production and the preservation of this important natural resource? How can we incentivize this in your view?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Henderson, that's a great question. Unfortunately, I think there's no way for you to guarantee where this money is going to go. So you give, $10 million to the industry with this bill. There's no guarantee that they put it back into infrastructure, like Commissioner Bell was talking about. It could be it just goes to shareholders and CEO pay, frankly. There's no guarantee of where it goes. So I think it's very difficult actually for you as Wyoming legislators to figure out ways to help the industry produce more, because again, that really is dependent on these overall market pressures that frankly are just outside your control. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for being here today.
You bet.
Thank you for your testimony. Is there anyone else here would like to testify on this bill? Okay, is there anybody online on this bill? Seeing none. Okay. No more public comment. Okay, so we're going to close public comment. Members, what's your pleasure on the bill?
Move the bill.
Okay, it's been moved by Representative Hallinan, seconded by Representative Henderson. Okay, members, any amendments to the bill? Okay, Representative Henderson.
We heard a lot of good testimony and all things considered. I'd like to propose an amendment on page 1, if that's in order, Mr. Chairman. And on line 14, delete the words "and 0.5% and any conforming requirements throughout the bill. And if I can get a second, I'll explain.
Is there a second? Second. It's been seconded by Representative Jennings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in my view, committee, this is one of our most important natural resources. And well, this has a kind of a both sides to it. We've heard testimony from the people in the county where are directly affected. And I think it's pretty clear. If we have the opportunity when the time requires to do the right thing, well, I think we should do that. In my view, this is the right thing. Everybody knows what's going on outside our borders. Everybody also knows what's happening the last few days in the world. And everybody knows what happened in Texas. And so I think this makes a lot of sense. And I'd urge your favorable support.
Okay, so any discussion then on the amendment, Representative Sweeney?
So if I'm to understand the amendment, it's actually deleting the 6.5%.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Sweeney, the amendment reduces it from 6.5 to 6.
Okay.
Just make sure all members are clear and folks who are watching it. So it's the amendment would be a further reduction. Okay. Any other questions, comments, Representative Hallinan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the amendment, but I don't believe that. I think this might make the bill harder to pass. With it being 6%, it would cost the state a little bit more money. I really think it's a good idea, but I think that the political issue is such that it would be harder to pass the bill, and I'd like to leave it at 6.5%. Thank you.
Okay, any other comments on the amendment? Go ahead, Representative Roscoe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess just doing the math, that's just another $10 million out of our education, highways, all that stuff. Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
This is severance, so this is all budget reserve general fund money. No, even if those minerals are mined on school lands, there's no severance tax goes to schools. Okay, any other comments on this proposed amendment? Okay, sensing you're ready to vote, all those in favor of the amendment, please say aye.
Right.
Those opposed say no.
No.
That amendment has failed. Are there other amendments on the bill? Okay, question being called on the bill. Could you please take the roll on House Bill 105?
Representatives Baker. Was that an aye, sir? Gray?
Aye.
Hallinan? Henderson? Jennings? Roscoe?
No.
Sweeney? Yin? Mr. Chairman? Mr. Chairman, we have 7 ayes, 2 noes, the noes being Representatives Roscoe and Representative Yin.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And thank you all for being here today. Our next bill for our consideration is House Bill 109, Property Tax Acquisition Value Study. And that is sponsored by our own Representative Jennings. So if you want to just sit right there and present the bill, that'd be great. And we'll just pause for a minute, and let folks transition who are coming in and out between bills. Okay, very good. Go ahead, talk to us about House Bill 109.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, this comes from the subcommittee having this being brought up from the interim. And it kind of fell to the side because we had other bills And so I took an interest in this. I think we saw that there's recently been a lot of interest, like in the middle of our state. So many tax protests. And I began looking at that, and I looked at the Constitution where it says all taxation shall be equal and uniform within each class of property. And the legislature shall prescribe such regulations as shall secure a just valuation for taxation of all property, real and personal. And that's what got my interest is that there's, true or not, there's a perception out there that there's a problem with equity and fairness. And so that is the reason for this bill, to find out what we don't know. And so there's real concerns, I think. Somebody moves in, especially in this climate, lots of people move in next door to you and they raise your tax rates. And we're seeing people that are very concerned. I think the testimony in Casper was that people were actually giving up their property and leaving the state. They're being taxed out of their homes. And in the western state, the people had to do it by a proposition because the legislature never would. And you'll notice after all these years and all the end runs of trying to get rid of that, the people have hung on to that. And so I think it's worth doing a study to find out what that might look like. You'll find out that I put it in there that it's procedural changes to make this revenue neutral. So you wouldn't go back in time. You wouldn't say, okay, I bought my house 25 years ago. So the state would actually start off at the same place. The people that I've talked to in the real estate, there's a real possibility that this would bring a revenue into the state, more revenue, because people are, it's a hot market right now and they're paying premiums. Now, we wouldn't necessarily in this study go after the escalator of 2 or 3%, what the other two states have. I think California is 2 or 3 and Florida is the only other state that has it. But I think it's fair for us to at least look at this. It's fair to say, we might have some problems. There might be fairer ways to look at how we tax our property. And so I chose two personal, or the housing, personal property or property tax. And I'd just like to look at the impacts. I realize that this is not a one-time study and then you're going to make a decision on that, because you're going to have to constitutionally look at all of the classes. You're going to have to look at the entire thing. And I would actually, when we get to that part, and when the agency comes up, I've talked to them, and I think I would like to put an amendment in the back of this that we would do something like $70,000, and whatever is not used would be reverted back. But I think we owe it to the people of Wyoming. There's a lot of people that are afraid of losing their homes, and they've lived all their lives and they've put their money into this state, and now people come in from the outside are causing those taxes to go up just exponentially. So that's the gist of the state and the reason. So I'd stand with questions.
Okay, any questions of the committee for the sponsor, Representative Baker?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my question is on page 2 and lines 12 through 14. As used in this section, acquisition value means the purchase price paid for the acquisition property. So I was just wondering, how do you propose that the department acquire the purchase price?
Okay, Representative Jennings.
Well, thank you for that, Representative. I think that's one of the things that would have to be answered in the study. I honestly don't know the best answer to that, but I think that's one of those things that I think that the agency probably could come up with and tell us possibly.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, any folks from agency like to come testify? We're going to open this up now to public comment. Morning.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Brenda Henson, Director of Revenue. This particular bill, what I'd like to do is just go over some of the primary components of the bill, starting with page 1, where it talks to, on lines 10 and 11, where it talks to the department shall conduct a study of the statutory, regulatory, and procedural changes. And it truly is limited to that. So I would envision that specific to acquisition value, as stated in the bill, that we would need to review all of the items, constitutional, statutory, everything related currently to our fair market value system of taxation, and identify what components would be necessary to have changed. When I go to page 2, it does state that the manner that it would be implemented would be revenue neutral. In the first year, my assumption is revenue neutral, meaning to the taxing entities, perhaps not revenue neutral to the taxpayer, but want to ensure that I'm understanding the direction that is being noted in this bill. Going down to lines 7 and 8, you'll note that this acquisition study is limited to those classifications that are not agricultural land and commercial property. Now, the default to that would mean residential and industrial. Perhaps if it is the will of this group to focus on residential property, it might be easier just for the purposes of this study to focus there. If we look at the industrial classification, not only does that include our manufacturing and industrial properties at the local level that assessors do, but it also looks at those department assessed companies that we value at the Department of Revenue. So, you know, for all properties, as appraisers, we're looking to get to fair market value, we're looking at the 3 approaches to value. Certainly an acquisition value-based taxation system eliminates the review of those. So, you know, just wanting to ensure basically the marching orders with this piece of legislation for the study. Perhaps it might be better at this point to limit it to residential. The other piece on the lines 13 and 14 of page 2, where it talks about acquisition value, to address Representative Baker's question. So we do have laws within our state that require anytime equitable value in a property transfers that a statement of consideration be completed. Now that is confidential. Currently, it's only to be used by the State Board of Equalization, the county assessors in valuing property, and then the Department of Revenue in monitoring that process through the CAMA system, computer assisted mass appraisal system. So we have access to that information, but certainly if the basis of a tax is going to be that acquisition value, I think it would be important for the state board to be involved. They're the ones that actually promulgate the format of that statement of consideration. So I think, you know, they would need to be included in that discussion. The other piece of that is it may be, and we'll find out when we do the study, maybe that lends itself more to public disclosure of sales information within Wyoming if we have a tax structure that's based on that. So we would anticipate, the Department of Revenue would anticipate hiring an outside consultant to identify all of the constitutional, statutory, administrative aspects that would need to be updated in order to implement an acquisition value statute. Also, we have already reached out to our CAMA provider to ask what modifications would need to be put in the system that all 23 county assessors use to value property at this point. But in closing, I think my interpretation of this is it is a data collection piece of legislation. We would be required to simply identify all of the statutory constitutional provisions that would need addressed and the administrative aspects within all of our agency rules, everything related to that fair market value standard that we've had in Wyoming since approximately 1989. And so with that, we would not be, the study would not be saying whether it's a good idea or a bad idea. We would just put that right out there. It is simply collecting data for your consideration as the body that would identify our statutory process. We had asked for an estimate from some of those consulting companies that are out there available that do various studies like this. And unfortunately, they just did not feel that they would have time to give us a price. They anticipated that it would take at least 30 days of looking at just the basics of our statute to even give me an estimated cost. I am reaching into the air, and I've been asked, and I would think that $70,000 would possibly get us to that point. But I am just guessing, and I wanted to make sure that the committee understood that. With that, I'd answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could you just briefly go over the involvement that would be required from the state board and the statement of consideration again for me? Thank you.
Certainly. Mr. Chairman, Representative Baker, under our current statutes, the statement of consideration is under Title 34. And it is that body that prescribes the format, the rules on how the statements of consideration can be utilized, and also identifying, when they can be shared, typically within an appeal process. But other than that 30-day window, statements of consideration are not public right now. Since this study would contemplate how we acquire the acquisition value, I just think it would be beneficial. And I'm not saying that the State Board of Equalization would necessarily be responsible for putting together any of the information, but I would think under the statement, I believe page 8 and 9 states that the department shall consult with interested stakeholders on the study under this section. I just believe that they would be an interested stakeholder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just briefly, so if the state were to move to something like this, would it be reasonable to assume that an individual could take somebody's tax burden and then just reverse engineer to what the purchase price was? So even if we didn't move to a disclosure, it would pretty much make it available to everybody as far as what the purchase price was. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Baker, perhaps, we really haven't contemplated how this would work out, in that you've got acquisition values for those properties that changed hands, but we still have to value the remainder of those properties. If we have 15% of the properties, which would be a large percentage of properties in the state of Wyoming, residential properties per se, that are selling, we still have to have a mechanism to value all the other properties. So I'm not sure, as a taxpayer, if I were to look at the assessed value, and we don't know what that's going to look like either. If I were to look at the assessed value, I wouldn't be able to identify whether that value was based on an acquisition value or if it's based on however the other mechanisms that we may use to value other properties. So it's possible. Some of you may recall, historically, we used to have what's called revenue stamps in Wyoming. And if you research historical deeds, you'll see revenue stamps stuck on a deed. And that was truly a transactional tax of sorts, that each of those stamps reflected a dollar amount that was exchanged at the time of purchase. So if you know what the revenue stamps related to, you could make that calculation back then as well. That process was in place even prior to my working in property taxation. So it's been a while.
Okay. Representative Sweeney has a question.
Couple of questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So first off, are you saying because of the structure of the bill that the consultant wouldn't look at the two states that have already gone this way within the study because of the way this has been structured?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Sweeney, I think what my understanding would be is they may look to those states to see what type of statutory provisions are in place to implement such a tax structure. But I don't anticipate that it would be the department via our consultants' responsibility to identify the pros and cons.
Okay. Second question, Mr. Chairman. So are we, by not applying this same standard to agricultural land or commercial property, if we looked at just residential, as you've suggested, in leaving out the industrial, are we in the study already setting ourselves up for a constitutional battle, unfair and equitable across all classes?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Sweeney, because I believe that in order to implement an acquisition value for any of our property types, we're going to have to look at our constitutional language. There will be no getting around it because our tier system has 11.5% of fair market value is our assessed value for industrial. And then the all other classification includes commercial, residential, and agricultural at 9.5% of fair market value or productivity value in the case of agricultural land. So I believe simply by moving to an acquisition value system, we already have to I don't need a private consultant to tell me that we're going to have to re-examine our constitutional provisions in order to implement an acquisition value study. Talking, if I may, it talks about revenue neutral. So when we first went from the system that we had in place in Wyoming prior to fair market value, which was 25% of a 1967 replacement cost, we had assessed values at that point. Okay. When we went to fair market value, the manner and process that was used to identify the 9.5 and the 11.5 that we currently have in statute today was to look at, okay, if I appraise these properties at fair market value and I look at the assessed value that we had under the old system of 25% of 1967 replacement, what on average is the level of assessment that would be necessary to keep it revenue neutral? That's how we came up with the 9.5 and the 11.5. And so I don't know if similarly we would be looking at that exercise to somehow come out with another percentage of value. This body knows that there are other states that they don't have levels of assessment. They value everything at full value, whether it's market value or however they've defined it, but there is no fractional assessment in such as Wyoming. Those fractional assessments basically mean that anything that's not assessed is exempt, right? We've got fair market value at full value, but we reduce that level of assessment to 9.5 or 11.5% for industrial. So we don't ask anybody to pay taxes on that differing part. So I think in order to implement acquisition value, we need to re-examine all those components of our constitution, statutes, and rules, all of the administrative procedures currently in place. I hope that answered your question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Spy. Morning.
Good morning. I'm Dave Davis. I am the Sweetwater County Assessor. I'm also currently the president of the Wyoming County Assessors Association, and I'm here to testify in favor of this bill. as usual, Director Henson usually beats me to my points, and she did again. One of the questions we had as assessors when we spoke about this bill was whether the bill actually testified to the term property. It specifically identified agricultural and commercial, but it didn't really identify residential as being the topic of the bill. I think that's the intent. And, rarely do we know legislative intent for sure, but I think this one was pretty easy. So we did have the intent that this would be residential or real property. Some of the concerns we have as assessors then, and it doesn't mean we don't support it, but currently we're valuing properties based on sales. So in Sweetwater County, when I value property, I try and be about 96% of what the market value is for the properties in my area. So statutorily with the Department of Revenue and the State Board of Equalization, my number is 95 to 105. That gets me in compliance with both agencies that oversee me as an assessor. 96 is a really good sweet spot. It gives me a little time. If the market ticks up a little bit, I've got a little room there. If it goes down, usually the cost tables will take care of that and I'll get right back to that 96 percentile. It's really a good number to shoot for, at least in my county. This acquisition value is now taking that directly to 1. So we are no longer below the market for these properties that have sold. We are exactly at the market. So it's not good or bad, it's just different. This legislation is probably very good for a place like Teton County. I mean, the values in Teton County have gone off the charts and will continue to go off the charts. And I don't know what would happen to cause that to stop. And I think the theory behind the legislation is when a property sells, that value is locked in. And as the market continues to increase and go off the charts, like in Teton County's case, those people that bought those homes aren't necessarily paying taxes based on those other sales. That's what it should do. And it's really trying to keep people from actually being taxed out of their residences. But I live in Sweetwater County, and Sweetwater County is not like Teton County. We have booms, but we also have bus. So in that situation, if we were taxing these homes at acquisition value and they're staying there, what happens if the Jim Bridger power plant closes sooner rather than the 2030, whatever date that they keep telling us? What happens if all those homes go up for sale? Now the market has got a glut of supply. That market value for Rock Springs has actually gone down. But if we've been in this acquisition study or acquisition model for a while, we've got those homes locked in at that sale price. How do we adjust to pull those down? As the legislation comes out after the study, that's something I think that needs to be considered, because we don't want to lock them in when the market goes the other way. I do think it's a good bill. I do think the intent is right. I applaud you for trying to do this and take care of your taxpayers. And I would stand for any questions.
And I just, to be clear, you're representing the Assessors Association is in favor of the bill.
Actually, I was very careful when I said that. We've discussed it amongst the few assessors that have been down here, but we have not taken a formal poll.
Okay. Just so
I can tell you, I have not heard one negative comment from an assessor regarding this legislation.
Okay.
So I can infer that it's positive on my association's behalf.
Very good. Thank you. Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if this is implemented, based on your experience and those of your members, what do you see the net effect would be on resulting revenue?
Go ahead. Assessor.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Henderson, that's a very good question. It's going to be very interesting to see. I mean, I'll have about 600 sales in my county this year. And if we were in this model, those homes would be locked in on that acquisition value. That's not a large portion of my properties in my county. So I don't know that it's going to be, I don't know it's going to have a big effect on values. There may be places where it does. Teton County may be one. Overall, I honestly don't know. I mean, we would have to put pen to paper and actually come up with some numbers to see. But when we do get to that point where if this legislation passes, if you guys in your infinite wisdom decide that this is something that the state of Wyoming needs to do, we as assessors would like to be one of those stakeholders, because the taxpayers will be mad at you, but they'll take it out on us. So we would like to be able to at least be there and have our voice heard on how to administer this. And I do think Director Henson is correct. The State Board of Equalization needs to be involved in this as well, just simply because they are the agency currently charged If a county is undervaluing property or overvaluing property, they're the ones that are supposed to come in and equalize. Well, the equalization process may be different with this acquisitional value. So it's something where they need to be a part of it. I think the assessors need to be a part of it, along with the Department of Revenue as well.
Okay, very good. Any other questions? Representative Jennings?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you, sir, for being here this morning. So one of the things that I'd like to know, I mean, because to me, this is an interesting concept to find out what we don't know. But one of the things that I've heard is that this also might reduce your burden on figuring out the way that you currently do it, and it might make it easier for the assessors because you're no longer having to put in all this formula. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Sure.
That it might help the
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative Jennings. Yes and no. I mean, right now, there are queries that are run by the Department of Revenue and State Board of Equalization to identify what we call sales chasing, which is exactly what you guys are trying to do, where we actually take a value of a property, we put it to the value it's sold for, but we don't look at the rest of the neighborhood. So in our world, that's frowned upon. So what we do is we take that sale and multiple sales in multiple areas, and we apply that sales ratio to all the properties within that area. Just thinking out loud, I think we would still do that. And then the properties that did sell, we would actually use that sale to adjust those values of the remaining properties. But that sale would actually be placed in that account for that one that did actually sell. I don't think it's going to make it easier. I don't think it's going to, it'll be a little bit tougher, deciding, which properties did sell, managing that sales data. Director Henson testified earlier that she's reached out to Harris, who's the provider of our CAMA software. They are very good at what they do. I don't think it would be an issue for them to make this work. But it is something where we'll have to consider.
Okay, members, we're pushing up against the starting time here. Are there any other questions? Because I want to be sensitive. Do we have a person online? Anybody else here would like to testify? One person online. Any other questions for the assessor before we let you go off the hot seat here?
I'd really like to ask Henson a quick question.
Sure. Go ahead, Ms. Henson. And then if you can get the person online keyed up, we'll be ready to move
Thank
to
you.
them. Go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Henson, sorry I missed you here. On the first round of questioning. So I'm interested in what this is going to do to people's taxes. And I guess you could say this is kind of covered by the neutrality statement, but I think that's sort of a net neutral statement. So what I was hoping is some sort of demographic study of how this affects people's taxes on the ground and in each county. But is that your understanding that this is covered by this statute?
Go ahead, Director.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray, I did not anticipate it being down to the property level. What I read in this study is that we would look at implementing acquisition value. There's no guidance in this bill as to how do we value those properties that don't meet this criteria of having a price paid. So we've got the other universe of properties that somewhere the legislature would have to give guidance. Perhaps it would be, as Assessor Davis indicated, it might be that we're still appraising those properties at fair market value, and we're simply substituting acquisition price for those properties that actually sold. But even at that, you've got to identify what is that acquisition price. We all know that there are sales that occurred that are not open market sales. They're between family members, it may be corporations. So even defining acquisition value in itself needs some clarification, and I believe the study will bring that out. So specific to your question, I don't think with the language in this bill that we're going to get down to what does it mean for Mr. and Mrs. Smith.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think we're going to move. We have one person online. It's been waiting patiently. well, public testimony, and it's 9:54. We're going to gavel in at 9:50, or excuse me, 10 o'clock.
Mr. Chairman, Tally Payne has been admitted. They just need to turn on their mic and video.
Hi, committee. Can you see me? I'm joining from Cody over Zoom.
Yes, we can hear you and see you. Thank you.
Thank you. I had reached out to my representative, Rachel Rodriguez Williams. I'm just a resident of Park County, although I have lived in Casper and teach for Casper College. And she had pointed out this bill, the committee. I appreciate your time and the testimony that's been offered. I was simply joining as a citizen that we've mentioned how will this impact the people on the ground. I appreciated the assessor's testimony because that has been my experience, that people are upset and they take their concerns to the assessor's office. And in my case, the assessor pointed out that I should reach out to my state level representatives and senators. I'm not as familiar with what bills might be going on in the Senate, but I have reviewed this bill. I would be, again, I think I'm speaking for a lot of people because Park County has had similar to what he mentioned with Teton County, where I went through. My personal property taxes have increased about 20% 2 years in a row. That's carried over into my house insurance rates. I also run rentals. I can see the disparity when they don't have comparables because I had rentals that only increased 2% while my personal property was going up 20%. Anyway, I think everyone I know feels similarly. They don't understand the process or feel comfortable reaching out or how to get their voice heard. And I appreciate this bill doing a study. I know there's probably no perfect answer because, as they said, the market could go down. And then what do we do? The one thing that I'm concerned about with proposing a study is that we're just kicking a problem down the road another year while people will still be then facing 15 to 20. I have actually heard of someone's property tax just last year was 25% on their personal property. And it's just pricing the long-term residents out of their homes. So my, again, concern was the study is a study and it doesn't actually then translate necessarily into a very fast moving implementation of legislation that will be relieving of the issue. I don't know. I wonder if there's a way to propose a rider that puts a hold on increases while the studies occur, because perhaps there's other valuation methods. I know I did just look up when California passed their acquisition value property tax, they rolled the value back 3 years. So it can be retroactive. And perhaps that would be something that would be found in the study. I doubt it, but that's just a thought. Again, and I'm happy to answer questions. I just wanted to weigh in. I actually teach government for Casper College, so I'm pretty comfortable with the process. But I feel like I'm speaking for a lot of people that just aren't as comfortable reaching out, speaking, inserting themselves into the process, and hope, that, as I'm sure you're aware, if you're Wyoming residents, you're probably facing the same thing when you open your assessed values and have to have a little heart attack. Okay, so that's my thoughts from Cody this morning. Appreciate your time and service.
Okay, thank you for joining us. Any questions? Representative Yin has a question.
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Payne, thank you for joining us. Do you know if Park County has deed restricted housing in any form? So I know in Teton County, we can exercise deed restrictions on our housing that limit the amount of resale value on a per year basis, which does let the assessor restrict the amount of assessment because the assessment is based on fair market value. So if the resale value is limited by a deed restriction, it does restrict the amount the property tax can increase. So I'm curious to know if your county has any programs like that.
Go ahead,
Mr.
Ms.
Chairman.
Payne.
That I am not sure of. When I called, they said there was, when I called and to talk about my assessed value, they said that there might be a needs-based program that could offer some relief. They said they were aware of a bill that had failed last year, and they said I could appeal, which I did. And the appeals process wasn't even a guarantee on my property tax rates. They had to send an assessor out. We did find that they, had miscorrectly calculated some of the finished square footage, and it reduced my bill like $200 or $300. It was, but I'm not sure if they're a deed. It sounds probable, but I haven't pursued that.
Okay, well, thank you again for joining us. Appreciate you. Okay, so any other public comment? We're going to go ahead and close public comment. Members, what's your pleasure on this bill? It's been moved by Representative Sweeney. Seconded by Representative Gray. Okay, are there any amendments? Page 1.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Representative Jennings.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know exactly where we'd want to put it, but maybe in the title there, that I think we should put a holder for the $70,000 for the cost of the study, and then they would revert.
Right, that'd be a new section 3.
Okay.
Or we'd renumber, it'd be section 2 and then renumber.
So
So really, and LSO can work that out. So the amendment would be to add 70,000 for the cost of the study.
and revert whatever's not
You
used.
bet. Yeah, and that's classic language, standard language. Is there a second to that amendment? Second. By Representative Sweeney. Okay, members voting on that amendment to add a few funds to pay for this study, 70,000. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that amendment has been adopted. Are there other amendments?
Yeah, sure.
Go ahead, Representative Gray.
On page 2, line 9, I'd like to, before interested stakeholders, add in before the word interested, with the Joint Revenue Committee and other interested stakeholders. So
Okay,
add the Joint Revenue Committee and other, and then the rest.
Second.
okay, that's been seconded by Representative Sweeney. Do you have that, Ms. Cruz?
Could you repeat that, please?
Okay, and on line 9, go ahead, Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It would read, the department shall consult with the Joint Revenue Committee and other interested stakeholders on the study under this section.
So the insert is Joint Revenue Committee and other.
Yeah.
Very good. Okay. Any discussion? Representative Young.
Mr. Chairman, I think this increases the workload of our interim, and frankly, I think we've done, we increase the workload of our interim every single year, and I'm a little worried that we are doing too much of that, so I'll be against the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, any other discussion? Okay, all those, I think all those in favor of the amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that's been adopted. Okay, any other amendments? Members, I think there was an issue on line 7 to really just say evaluation based on acquisition of residential property and then delete the rest of that through agriculture and commercial. Does anybody want to make that amendment? Representative Jennings, go ahead.
Yeah, I recommend that we just do the residential start. This is so the idea and the intent originally was that let's get this ball rolling. We're not going to fix it overnight, but we need to have the discussion, and residential is the place that probably would see the largest interest, and we should find that out. So I will be for narrowing it to that.
So that amendment would read then on line 7, evaluation based on the acquisition of residential property value.
Yeah.
Period.
I
I think that works. Director? Does that read right for you? Okay. This is Representative Jennings, but I just want to make sure we get this. Did you get that, Ms. Cruz? Okay, Representative Jennings amendment. Is there a second? Representative Hallinan. Okay, any question, any more discussion on the amendment? All those in favor of the amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that's been adopted. Okay, are there any other amendments to this bill? Seeing none, members? Sensing the questions being called. Oh, do you have a question?
We'll have one discussion.
Yeah, sure.
Mr. Chairman, I
Jimmy,
thought
yeah.
it was very interesting to hear from the Department of Revenue's testimony that we did in fact have a real estate transfer tax at some point in history. So I think that was cool. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah. Okay. I think we're ready to take the roll on House Bill 109.
Representatives Baker. Gray. Hallinan.
Aye.
Henderson.
No.
Jennings.
Aye.
Roscoe.
No.
Sweeney.
Aye.
Yen.
No.
That was a no, sir.
No.
Chairman Harshman.
Aye.
Chairman Harshman, we have 6 ayes, 3 noes, the noes being Representatives Henderson, Roscoe, and Yen.
Thank you all for joining us, and thank you, LSO, for helping us out, session staff. Appreciate your work. Thank you. We will have a meeting announcement for Thursday later, probably tomorrow. So thank you, or meeting's adjourned.